Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back this week. Right here on KNZZ KGLN. This is Rick Wagner, trying to get it right every week. I appreciate your listenership and participation. So here we go again. Another week goes by very, very fast, it seems like. And, some things have changed a lot, and some things don't have changed at all. One of the questions I got most just for discussion was this Epstein files thing. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are legitimately interested in this, and probably should be. And then there's the media that, of course, really is interested in it because they think they can somehow make Donald Trump look bad with it. And that gets a lot of play. But I went back and looked at some of this stuff just because I wanted to understand it a little bit better. You know, this whole thing about the releasing the Epstein files is, when you look at what kind of evidence and stuff they originally picked up when they were doing these raids and whatnot, it's not as simple as it sounds. And I think that, frankly, everybody sort of popping off earlier about, oh yeah, we're going to release these files, hadn't really considered two or three things about the files that really are, one, stumbling blocks, and two, really out of context if you're not careful. Remember, they raided his Santa Fe ranch, his island retreat, as it were, his logs on his airplane, which he had flying a lot of people around, and trying to get his business records and so forth. Some of these, of course, make weird sense. In other words, you understand what's happening, but you don't know why. One of the things that is interesting from what they have uncovered is, how did he make all this money? Very wealthy guy. Didn't start out that way. There was a moment there where he was in the outer orbit of the sort of financial planner, big deal, wheeler dealer thing, but not in it. And then at some point, he started accumulating some very savvy and rich clients for his services in terms of investment advice and whatnot. And of course, some of this is, I invest and I get a percentage of what I accumulate, this and that. All these ways. There's a lot of different ways to make money off that stuff. But if you look back at his history, I mean, this guy does not have the kind of background that you would have thought that would have led to this sort of high-flying financial advisor stuff. He didn't have that kind of track record at all. Apparently, he didn't do badly with what he had, but he was nothing that would shake the doors off the hinges. So what's he doing? Well, I think everybody has an idea about what he's doing. The issue, of course, is, when did that start? What kind of things started it? And who's really involved? In other words, who does he deploy these tactics against to get their business? And are there people out there who just come along and are in his business that don't necessarily have to be forced into it because they don't know any better, and it looks like big people are making money in it? You know, so-and-so is in it, so it must be good. There's some of that, too. So you have that kind of strange thing just about the business organization. Then you have all this stuff that they apparently collected. I was noticing there's CDs, some video stuff, of course, various logbooks and files on people and this and that, but there's no place that I saw that there was a centralized storage of all this stuff, linking it all together. Now, there may be. I just didn't see any reference to it. And it may be that it was in his head, which we don't have access to anymore, in terms of this stuff is here, that stuff is there, these things go together. It can create quite an interesting problem. And one of the things that I understand persons have to be careful about is that when you look at it, there are a lot of people involved with Epstein in terms of some of his investments, or that he would fly places, get buddy-buddy with them. He was very good at schmoozing people, and not just with this weird, procurement thing or stuff, but he had a way of getting involved with them. And then, of course, since he apparently had some sort of hold over some important people, they introduced him to other people. Doesn't mean necessarily that those other people were involved in the more nefarious side of things. How do you tell the difference? So the idea there, and I think this is where people started on the releasing end of it. This is people who talk about releasing the files and so forth. It almost seems like they're people that hadn't really reviewed all the files, and then they figured out, oh man, there's all these problems. We got to figure this stuff out. And there's more than likely people that are referenced in some of these files, correspondence, lists, or whatever, that don't have anything really to do with the criminal, nefarious, disgusting side of what he was doing. But there's a lot of guilt by association. So those people, I'm certain, were, making their views heard. Say, hey, look, he gave me a ride a couple times on the plane. I'm sure I'm on the flight logs, but look, I didn't, nothing happened. I didn't go to the island, and if I, this kind of stuff. You remember, there's been a couple of people who've been linked to that have had a big fight to try and get themselves torn away from that side of his impression of the business, or whatever you want to call it. So my guess is that there's a lot of individual names or so forth that you can't nail down exactly how far they were involved in this stuff, if at all. Now, there's going to be some information out there that is pretty clear about so-and-so was involved in this, because there's obviously, probably sees some blackmail material. Now, how indexed it was, who knows, and what it involves. One of the things, when you start looking up, a lot of this is grand jury testimony. So by its nature, the grand jury testimony is secret, and it has to be released usually through the court. You have to petition the court to say, we need to release this stuff. Although he has, in fact, left this mortal coil and moved on to wherever he would move on to, there nevertheless is all of this evidence that has the grand jury seal upon it. Also, don't forget there's Ms. Maxwell and so forth that's in prison that, may or may not have some input into this stuff, and whether or not the grand jury proceedings that may involve her can be released for whatever reason. We just don't know. The more you look at it, the more complex it is, and his whole organization seemed to be set up to sort of just lure people in, and also to hobnob, as it were, I think is the word we're looking for here, so that he not only had individuals who he was working with and may have, apparently, were involved in illegal activities with underage people, and maybe, who knows what else, particularly on his island. But he also is trying to ingratiate himself with people all over the spectrum, because he realizes that, one, the more you know in terms of money-making potential. And secondly is hey, I get in with these people. Maybe down the road I can lure them into something that I can hold over their head and get a bunch of their money. Don't know. So I understand how hard it is to release this stuff, but the longer that they talk about it and don't do it, the more difficult it becomes. And then this videotape from the corrections place where he was found to be hanging, I guess, shows metadata that there's some stuff missing from it, almost 3 minutes missing. Why is that? What does that look like? And here's the other thing that I thought about when it came out is, who would release it that way? I mean, who doesn't know that kind of material being released is going to be instantly analyzed by people to see if it's been messed with? So, what do you think was going to happen? I can't believe I can believe, but I mean, think about how foolish you are if you're some sort of any kind of expert or have a brainwave on this stuff to say, oh, I'm going to mess with it, even though I know that very talented people are going to get a hold of it and see if it's been messed with. It's strange when you think about it. I don't have an answer, but it's complicated. Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for sticking around again. We were still talking about this Epstein thing, and I'm probably as unfocused as the rest of the material is on it, but the more you looked into it, the more complex it becomes. Not because it's one of these things like the John Kerry approach. Well, it's too nuanced for people to understand. No, there's just a lot of stuff, and it's scattered around various places. And as near as I can tell, this is probably don't have any grand jury testimony, anything like that. There's no like master list of what was going on. There's no Santa's list of who's been naughty and who's been nice, right? There are some lists of people that we know this that flew on the plane. There's manifests. There's this. There's that. People that visited various things. But some of that, surely, you can't tie to anything specifically. So those people who are on those lists who didn't do anything but were just being courted by some dude who was trying to suck up to them and maybe should have known that he was not a good guy. Let's not pretend that didn't happen. They could get really tarred and feathered by something that they didn't necessarily participate fully in. Not that I feel sorry for many of them, but, first of all, a lot of these dudes have a whole lot of money. That's the reason they were hanging around with him, or he was hanging around with them. And they have their own planes, their own jets and whatnot. I mean, so what do they need this guy flying them around for? What is somebody that, were the top 5 people in the world in terms of riches is letting this guy fly him around when he has probably several planes of his own? Why is he doing that? We're not exactly sure. We do know that he was sort of, Mr. Good Times, the fun Bobby kind of person, in addition to his nefarious stuff. So maybe people were drawn in by that. Also remember that a lot of these people that are associated with them are nerds. And I don't mean that in too much of a funny way, but they're people who have a lot of money but are not particularly socially sophisticated. They may not be aware of what was really going on around them. I know I'm making a lot of excuses here, and they're not really excuses. I'm just saying that there's a lot of bad stuff in there. How you sort it out and how you order it so that people can make some sense out of it and see who was really involved and who wasn't. I think it is difficult. But at this point, we're going to have it or have some of it. Some of it's never going to come out because it's probably connected with illegal activities that by nature cannot be seen. In other words, it would be illegal to view certain types of activities, right? Child pornography is one of them. So you're not going to get a release of a video that has that stuff on it. So that's going to be a problem as well. So I don't know. I think people just kind of stepped into the Trump administration by perhaps being a little too casual in talking about releasing things that they hadn't really taken a deep dive in to say, okay, what's this? And if we release this, won't it imply that we need to release that? And can we release that? And can we get permission to do this grand jury testimony that explains these two things? It can't be very easy. But boy, they've really stepped in it, and they've given the Democrats a little talking point there, which I don't think people take very seriously, because if you're upset about this and you want to know something about it because you wonder why they're hiding it, that's one thing. If you're feeling that way because Hakeem Jeffries is telling you that, that's a whole different thing altogether. Remember, these guys weren't the slightest bit interested in releasing any of this stuff under the Biden administration. Not on their plate at all. But also, remember, if hypocrisy were a fatal disease, there'd only be a handful of people wandering around the halls of Congress. Maybe 6 or 7, and probably 2 of those will be people who were working in maintenance. So you're not exactly getting a lot of people who are afraid to be one way one time and another way the other and just act like the first time never existed. This is what's called apparently politics these days. It's a strange thing when you think about it, because we're much more able now than we were in the past to go back and see what people said, particularly in campaigns and things like that. Not just off-the-cuff stuff, which we can't get to, but I mean, who made official statements, speeches, things in Congress, things waving your tiny fists in the air if you're Chuck Schumer, stuff like that. We're so much more able to capture that, find it, categorize it, and bring it back to the fore to say, look, you said this then, now you're saying this now, what's the difference? That doesn't seem to affect these people at all. they're just as likely to try and pretend that people have no idea what they said 6 months ago as they were if it was 1959, like when you had to go go to the newspaper archives to find proof of something. They have the same attitude. What I think is kind of unnerving about that is that attitude when anybody with a higher than room temperature IQ, which granted eliminates a number of people in Congress, would say, hey, it's easy to find out if we changed our position on this. So what really must underline this is that they don't think people care. And to some extent, they're proven right because there is so much polarization on the political side of it that they're not interested in the hypocrisy angle or the irony in some of these cases. Because if it can be used as a club against the other side in the political divide, they don't really care if their politician just changes his vote on that, or rather change his voice on that. They don't care. And I think that's really dangerous, that you no longer care about people who are at best weather vanes blowing in the wind to see which way things go, or at worst calculating narcissists, which may be closer to the truth, who think that you're not going to figure it out anyway. And if you do, you won't care, because they assume that everybody's memory in the United States now is of about, 3 to 4 days, I think. A lot of this, you get this idea from just looking at this sort of rolling kind of kaleidoscope of disasters that you see in the news anymore. This 2 or 3 things happen. Some of them are very local. Doesn't mean they're not terrible, but they're very local. And then they're just pulled up onto the national cable news and just ran with endlessly for 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 days, until something else happens. And then they're dropped like hot potatoes, maybe referenced again, but so they move on. This is not a good way to deliver news to the population. It's more like some sort of, some sort of entertainment show, where you're just trying to keep people constantly hooked in on something else and say, oh, they're getting tired of that. What about this? And of course, what gets people most interested are things that are usually dangerous or confusing or shocking. You're not going to get a lot of news reported about, hey, these guys are doing X, Y, and Z. Isn't it great? You get a little of that once in a while. Not very much. So it's always going to be something like that. And like I've said before, one of the problems that I think has arisen with the 24-hour news cycle that we have with cable news and whatnot is that not only do they have to fill all this time, which is a big problem if you think about it, but they stay focused on reinvigorating these narratives every hour or two because they know their audience is turning over. So, in essence, even though they're not saying they're headline news, they're kind of headline news. There's very little kind of in-depth looking for topics that aren't the topics of the day. And we try and talk about that here. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world that we should be thinking about. For instance, we've talked about the Houthi rebels, if you want to call them rebels, that keep trying to sink ships in the Red Sea and this and that, and we've bombed the heck out of them. I think I mentioned next week that somebody's going to have to go in there. Hopefully it's the someone from the Middle East and pry them out of there, because the kind of weaponry they're using and so forth to harm this shipping is fairly mobile and not super sophisticated anymore. And partly because this shipping through the Red Sea, particularly the Suez Canal, makes these guys sitting ducks. So you got to get rid of these dudes. Now, we bombed them back for a while, but now they're back. They've driven back up from wherever they were in their little trucks with this stuff loaded in the bed and starting shooting at things again. They sunk 2 container ships, cargo ships, this last week in the Red Sea. Now, they're obviously not getting the message. This is the problem. We can talk about this more, but this is the problem when you're dealing with fanatics. They don't make rational decisions. By their very definition, they're not rational about their belief system. They're overenthusiastic. They reject anything outside of it. The more they're oppressed sometimes, the more they think they're right. There's a lot of things that go into that. If you want to read something that just puts a finger right on it, as I mentioned many times, read The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, because that's where that all comes from. You really get a sense of that and the kind of people that are attracted to it. But you can't just show people who are fanatics that, well, it'd be better if you did this. They don't think that way. They're locked into a particular doctrine, a way of doing things, because they self-identify with it. It's not like they're choosing the brand of toothpaste or something to see which works best. They've decided that what this doctrine is who they are. And that motivates them. And it's pretty hard to shake somebody out of a persona that they've decided to adopt, mainly because their other persona was not very good. So they adopt this one. A very difficult and tricky thing to do in today's world.
We sang a song.
All right, folks, we're back. Thanks a lot once again. I always like to thank everybody in each segment so they don't just say, that's enough of that guy, and, go their separate ways. Try and, be interesting enough to hold people, for 2 or 3 minutes between breaks or whatever. So we've talked about a couple of interesting things here this week, and I don't know where we're going to end up in a lot of these situations if you watch the news. And as I said in the last segment, watching the news usually gives you insight into about 2 or 3 things. And sometimes you get a lot of news or a lot of talking, but not a whole lot of insights. And, of course, one thing I complain about is this constant reiteration of the same talking points with different people. You know what I'm talking about, where you watch a show and they have a panel on there and they yammer on about the topics. That's okay, I can listen to that. And then an hour later, they have another show with another panel, and they talk about the same things. And as time goes by, you realize that very few people have anything to add to these kinds of discussions. And you just become inundated with repetitive information that is of only limited utility to you. And for some reason, people continue to tune into this. I think it's because they don't want to tune into the alternative, and I'm with you on that. I spend some time watching some of the alternative from the more conservative media just so I can talk to you guys about it, and it ain't pretty. And it's the same thing. It's just a different take. Now, I would say that depending on your frame of mind when you're doing it and whether or not you've had a couple of beers or something, that some of the left rhetoric from like MSNBC and 2 or 3 other of these little places, some of the podcasters, can be frighteningly entertaining. I mean, people shouting at you things that you can't believe they're saying, and apparently they must believe they're saying, or they think you're dumb enough to believe it. It's a little entertaining. I'm not going to lie. It's like, look at that. I mean, this is the problem with human nature. We do like train wrecks, right? We don't want anybody to be hurt in them or anything, but we like watching them because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch all these kinds of things that go sideways. And when you're watching a person who obviously has lost their mind and are saying things that are just so far off center that it doesn't make any sense at all, but they're very committed to it, there's a certain amount of interest in that. And you really can find a lot of that on some of the left-wing media. And it happens really fast, too. I think this is why some people get fascinated with it is, for instance, if you're watching more conservative media outlets, you don't hear nearly as many 4-letter words. Now, we do hear some of them, or we get bleeping of them. I think if you watch like Fox on Gutfeld and stuff, that there's a fair amount of that in there. But it's not like what's arisen on the left now, where first, these people are so unhinged most of the time, when you're sort of, frothing at the mouth, as it were, the profanities come pretty easily. But now, they've adopted the idea on the left that it makes them look tough. It is ridiculous. As I've said before, you have people who, throughout their entire life, have probably not been able to punch their way out of a wet paper bag But they're tough guys now. They're going to take it on. It's ridiculous. You look at some of these guys and the way they're acting. Gavin Newsom is one of my very favorites. He is the most oscillating political figure you'll see out there. He has been on so many sides of so many different issues over time that it's absolutely nuts, you know. Sorry, my phone was ringing in the background there. And yet he just keeps right on going. It goes a little bit with what we were talking about previously, where people acted like that no one has any memory, or that there's no video or audio or VCRs from way back when, or DVRs now, or whatever you want. They just act like that either didn't exist or doesn't matter, or that people don't care. Hard to figure out what it is. Gavin Newsom is a master of this. And I say that fairly strongly because it's not easy to dance around stuff like he does. And he is of very limited intelligence. Now, I'm not saying he's, the village idiot. Some of his positions would be really found to be untenable and successfully defeated by a village idiot. But that's not it. He is full of the song and dance stuff. And he's really made a career out of it. I mean, come on. He's constantly able to speak fairly well and not say anything. There are 2 or 3 examples of this. I mean, the other night, let me think. Was it Thursday night? I think I was watching something on Fox, and they had a piece with him on a podcast. Because, nothing's going on in California. Everything's going swimmingly there. So Gavin has plenty of time to be on podcasts, traveling around, going to South Carolina, doing this and that, because nothing requires his attention there. That'll by itself ought to tell you something. Anyway, he was asked about this trans thing with, I think it was like 8-year-olds. What do you think, 8-year-olds should be able to do that? And then he spoke for, I don't know, a minute and a quarter. A lot of gesturing went on there. Yeah, that's a lot of waving of the hands. I don't know if he thinks that's going to make you disappear or that it distracts you from what he's saying. Hard to say. Or if it's just a nervous habit. In any case, it is distracting in a concerning way. He talked for a while. He didn't say a thing. He didn't really answer the question in any significant way. Well, not even in an insignificant way. He didn't even address it. He took off in a completely different portion of that and started talking about his support for gay marriage and this and, okay, what does that have to do with the question? Well, by the time he was done talking, you could barely remember what the question was. Now, this is not a stupid thing to do. Politicians do it all the time. But this is his shtick, as it were. When he gets pinned down and asked specific questions and follow-up questions, see, this is where it all comes down for him, where he said, well, that's all fine and good, but what about this? You didn't answer that. And after the second or third time he doesn't answer it, if you see him, he gets pretty flustered because he's run out of misdirections, things to say, talk about that aren't the topic. So he has convinced himself that he is, of course, presidential timber. One of those towering trees in the forest made of apparently paper mache and Brill cream. He's got that going on. The thing that he's got in his favor is that, once again, look at the rest of the people out there. I mean, you want to run, if you're running for president, you want to run Kamala again? You think she's gotten a lot better since the last time? You think that people are going to put up with you hiding her even more than you were trying to hide before because now they know why you're trying to do it? I don't think so. She raises high in polling because just people know her name. And after spending a couple of $1 billion on this campaigning, certainly $1 billion and some change just in the campaign from when Biden dropped out and she was thrust into the arena. So he would hope that people would have some kind of name recognition there. And then there's people who go, well, we need some sort of, a little calmer, more middle grade candidate. Now, what about Pete Buttigieg? Pete Buttigieg. I mean, is there anybody that has done less and talked more than Pete Buttigieg? First of all, he was transportation secretary. I would defy anybody to come up with something tangible that he did the entire time he was transportation secretary. All I can think of is that he didn't go to the train wreck in Ohio for, months. He was not working while he had a bonding leave with his new child, and nobody even knew he wasn't there. We're talking like 12 weeks or something. And this is my favorite really, on the bike to work day, he was photographed in Washington, D.C., where everybody either has a cell phone or is working for some media outlet, having his SUV pull up a couple of blocks from the Capitol, get a bicycle out, have him get on it, and ride in like he'd ridden from home. There's so many things wrong with that. I mean, first of all, it's just, come on. Is it that important to be this hypocritical? Is it important to be so hypocritical that you can't even one day ride your bike supposedly from the house, maybe with the SUV following you, or maybe towing you with like a little rope or something? Apparently not. Also, is your judgment of things so poor that you don't think that pulling up in a blacked out SUV that clearly some sort of government functionary along the side of the street and then getting out and hauling out a bicycle isn't going to attract somebody's attention? And if there's someone that's going to recognize you anywhere in the United States, it's probably Washington, D.C. It may not be very recognized, say, places where people work for livings because they don't have time to memorize your face, but certainly there. So what kind of judgment is that? This is another person who has zero accomplishments. He didn't even do a mediocre job as a mayor. If you go back and look at what was going on. The fact that he showed up as high as he did in the presidential race so that they had to give him a job in the administration to get rid of him is shocking. This guy managed to get this much momentum in the presidential race? What does that say about their candidates? Okay, I hear you saying. Cory Booker, of course. Cory Booker, as many of you remember, is, of course, a senator from New Jersey, and he had been a mayor there before. Many of us know him as Spartacus from his comments about this is a Spartacus moment, which, by the way, was, once again, not correct in terms of even the reference to Spartacus. But anyway, he's decided to get attention by apparently flailing. This is a way to get attention. It is a way to get attention if you're drowning. A lot of flailing, a lot of times will attract the attention of a lifeguard. That's what they're trained to look for, by the way. But it's not so great in political circles. So, let's see, was it 25 hours that he tried to stay on the floor giving a speech, attacking, complaining? Just, I don't know what, there's some more adjectives in there that I just can't come up with right now, about mainly Trump, which there's something to be said for talking that long about one topic, but it was pretty repetitive. I checked in a couple of times while he was giving these on the on the Senate just to see what he's, and it was at best circular. And there was a lot of bug-eyed stuff going on too. I don't know what exactly he was doing to stay awake. There's a lot of caffeine would be my guess at a minimum. But after the 15th or 16th cup of coffee, you start having trouble. And then, you can't take a bathroom break. So what was going on with that? Inquiring minds want to know. I have a couple of ideas, but I don't want to talk about them on what turns out to be, if you listen to the internet, national radio, or even local radio, because they're weird. And I have a strong suspicion that one of the possibilities that's very weird is, in fact, what happened. But anyway, so there's this guy. You think much of the country is going to trust him with anything? Well, apparently people in New Jersey did, but remember, some of these states are machine politicians. There's essentially where they're at, they're one-party systems. And we can tell by looking at what happened with Kamala, who's a beautiful example of this, is that once you get on that escalator in a one-party system, as long as you're checking certain boxes, have the right connections, it doesn't matter if you're competent. You just get pushed along. A lot of jobs that Kamala had that required competency that she didn't demonstrate even a touch of. Yet she got moved up to the next one. It's this escalator that develops in single-party states. And Cory Booker rode the escalator to the Senate for, I guess, the purpose of embarrassing people in New Jersey. Remember, the other senator was Menendez, so it gives you some idea of, what their selections are like there. So you got that guy. So that's not going to work for you. This is how they ended up with Biden. So if you take Newsom and you look at him from some distance and you compare him to some of the other possibilities, you kind of end up with, the Biden problem again. He's terrible, but he's not as overtly bad as these other characters. That's why I can see him being nominated. Now, there's a long time before that happens, by the way. 3 months in politics is, a lifetime for some. So we don't really know. But some of the other candidates out there that would be interesting, that are lurking in the corners, Gretchen Whitmer, people like to bring her up. Yeah, boy, whew, Gretchen Whitmer, yeah, the governor of Michigan. She's got a hard way of living in mind, I think. She was a completely wild-eyed, unfriendly martinet during COVID. And I think that's just kind of how the way she is. I don't think COVID brought it on. I think that COVID allowed her to be that way. I think COVID, with a lot of these politicians, the way it got imposed, gave us an opportunity to see who they are. And with her, you saw who she was. Same like Tim Walz. I mean, despite the, jazz hands and all this other stuff and completely moronic stuff he says, let's face it, this guy is, you're never going to see him sitting in a chair waiting to hear his Nobel Prize nomination, or rather, winning it. Anybody can get nominated. But remember, he had a very, very tight and ridiculous lockdown in his state. And like I like to bring up, I enjoy bringing up all the time, is the video you can find of the police officers under their mandate of walking up the street shooting paintball guns at people who were out on their porches when they're supposed to be in their houses. I never thought I'd see something like that. I mean, the United States. Much less, up there around the Great Lakes, for gosh sakes. That's what, he was okay with that. And of course, we've heard him now, he fantasizes himself as, being a possible contender. I don't know what for. He thinks it's president. I think contender for perhaps some sort of job in the carnival. But nevertheless, that's another one? You really think that's not going to go anywhere? That's a tested commodity. Whitmer, people look at her because she is not crazy overtly. She does crazy dictatorial things. And she can appear to be a little bit strict, I guess we could call that, to people. But at least she seems like someone that has, a little bit of smarts and some presentation skills. I think that what she did in Michigan would just come back to haunt her. She's just not the right fit for now. And God help us if she ever is the right fit for the country. So who you look around for? Really, if you want somebody that has some degree of tested competence, so you can see what they do, is governors are usually better at this when you're trying to find somebody for the presidency. Or, in the case of Trump, a really powerful negotiator, businessman, somebody with a completely different outlook. That can be the case, too. So if you poke around enough in the Democrat Party, what you come up with is Josh Shapiro. Now, you may recall Josh Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania. He is pretty well spoken, can sound like sort of a lefty, moderate-y kind of person, smarter than most of them, and was under consideration by Kamala to be vice president. But for various reasons, Josh was not selected for that position. Now, he really would have been the best choice by far. She needed Pennsylvania. And as the governor of Pennsylvania, and a reasonably popular one, he would have been a much better choice than Walz. So I leave it to you to figure out exactly why he wasn't chosen. But I think that some of the factors that why he wasn't chosen then was going to come back to bother him now. His stance on Israel and these kinds of things. The Democrat Party has moved so far to the extreme on those positions and is absolutely, in terms of its leadership, absolutely frightened to death to say anything that will enrage, activate, whatever, the really far left, communist, if you want to call it that. I don't think they're that organized. But anyway, side of their policy, which is just, this is what's taken over the country. I mean, the party, anyway. This is why I say when people want to start a third party, look what the Democrats have done. I've said this many times. They've had their party completely hijacked, taken over, and remade. So if you really would like to remake the Republicans, you can do it from the inside. I mean, just take a look at what happened to the Democrats. Imagine, now this is going back a long way, I know, but imagine somebody like, say, Hubert Humphrey, or let's jump ahead a little bit, Scoop Jackson, or some of those people from even that era, the 80s. They couldn't get a toenail in the national politics of the Democrat Party right now with their positions. Heck, Biden, a 1988 Biden, couldn't have gotten a position in 2020. We just luckily had somebody that was, let's say moldable, is that a word? But that he'd just say anything. So what do you have? I mean, the chances of them putting somebody up there that's at best a far-left socialist and possibly a Marxist, and perhaps not a Marxist that doesn't even say they're not a Marxist. I mean, look at the probably future governor of New York. I mean, I think that guy's going to win. I may be off base here, but everything I see, I mean, he's energized a base of people. They're going to turn out to vote for him because he's given away a lot of free stuff, and he taps into some anger, and the people that are voting for him don't care where his policies lie. Considering the low turnout that they have in those mayoral elections, if he turns out enough of those people, he can win. That will be really interesting.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
We'll follow that.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.